Hi, Professor Thomas. Today we're here to talk about anthropomorphism, which is giving human traits to animals or objects, and fairy tales, and how they play a big role in the stories we tell kids, um, and really how they shaped how I learned to read and imagine. Let's start with Little Red Riding Hood. I remember being very scared of this book as a kid. You know, the wolf isn't just a wild animal, he's this creepy, manipulative character who tricks Red and eats her grandma and then pretends to be her. It's pretty dark for a young kid. Um, the moral is, avoid wolves, aka maybe predatory men. That's actually not a comforting bedtime story, but it does stick with you. Um, and so it was really interesting to read The Wolf Story by Toby Forward because it totally gave you a different perspective. Suddenly he's the narrator and he's claiming it was all a misunderstanding. He didn't mean to eat grandma. This version is really funny and smart. It takes terrifying character and gives him complexity. And so this is really a great example of what anthropomorphism can do. It takes something scary and gives it feelings and a voice and maybe, even a chance at redemption. Juliet Markowski in her scholarly work explained that one of the biggest reasons children authors use anthropomorphism is so that they can identify with the characters. We may not all understand wolves or crayons or talking toads, but once they start acting like us, we get it. And it creates this bridge between fantasy and reality. She says kids identify more easily with a rabbit in a jacket like Peter Rabbit than an actual person, because animals let us explore human emotion without the adult baggage. Another reason she says is escapism. Take the day the crayons quit. Every crayon writes a letter to their owner. The blue crayon's exhausted from coloring skies. These are inanimate objects, but they suddenly have personalities and insecurities and opinions, and it's hilarious, but what it really does is make them more relatable. And then there's The Wind in the Willows, which Markowski actually calls out as a perfect animal of dressed animal stories that reflect human society. I love that the animals are acting out human roles. Toad is charming, but also vain and impulsive. Badger's gruff but wise. Graham creates this whole world where animals mirror human relationships. So the toad is still a toad. He's not a human in disguise. But Markowski points out that Graham didn't project the expected traits on animals. He invented new ones. No one thinks as toads as flamboyant. And that's just pure creativity. And, anthropomorphism isn't about just slapping clothes on animals. It's about creating believable characters out of the unbelievable. This concept plays a big role in fairy tales, which Hints and Tribunella discuss as optative, meaning wishful or imaginative, always pointing out to what could be. These stories aren't just small stories. They're supposed to help kids process big ideas like fear, hope, danger. In the case of Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf isn't just a wolf. He's a symbol of danger. These kinds of stories makes a huge difference for me growing up. They were scary, and sometimes that just made them stick. My favorite series of all time, Harry Potter, was big with anthropomorphism. The Sorting Hat's a great example. It's a hat, but it sings, it makes choices, it sees into your soul. This kind of magic works if you've learned to believe that non-human things can be important. So I used to be afraid of some of these fairy tales as a young kid, but I'm so grateful for them. They taught me that the world is full of so many different voices and just the power of imagination. So it was really nice to dive into this world again.